moon bled that night. It hung swollen and red above the blackwood forest, casting a dull, unnatural glow that turned the mist to blood-stained silk. The trees, ancient things with bark like cracked bone, stood silent, watching. Beneath them, two shadows ran. Lyra and Kale, mate-bound under the old rites of the Moonfang, raced through the trees as wolves. Their bodies sleek and powerful, their paws kicking up dead leaves that didn't rustle. Even the wind dared not disturb this place. They ran not in fear but in joy. It was the one night they could be free. Kale turned to her with glowing eyes, his breath clouding the air. They nuzzled briefly, affection in the brush of fur, a kind of love that only wolves understood. Feral, loyal, eternal. But then Kale stiffened. His ears twitched. A sound foreign, unnatural, broke the rhythm of the woods. The first snare snapped like a bone breaking. Kale yelped, limbs thrashing as silver coils wrapped around his hind legs, dragging him backward through the underbrush. The forest roared to life with movement, rustling leaves, disturbed crows, and something worse, chanting. Lyra bolted after him, her form shifting mid-sprint, paws cracking into fingers, snout retracting as she tore through branches and blood. She emerged into a clearing, unnatural in shape, circular, carved into the earth like a wound. In its center stood Ashmark. He wore a cloak stitched from wolf hide, fur still matted with dried blood, and over his head, the flayed face of a beast, its hollow eyes empty of mercy. He held a silver dagger etched in ancient runes, and Kale lay before him, convulsing in the trap, his body fighting the silver infection. Ashmark's voice was low and hateful. "You chose love over blood. The curse ends with you." The blade rose. Lyra screamed, her voice breaking the air like shattered glass, but it was too late. Ashmark plunged the dagger deep into Kale's chest, carving a cruel spiral as he murmured some forgotten tongue. Blood fountained onto the ritual circle. Kale arched once, then he went still. Lyra dropped to her knees, her transformation incomplete. Half woman, half beast, all agony. Her claws tore the ground. Her scream became a howl. But Kale's eyes, they were still open, still staring, not at Ashmark, not at her, but past her, into the woods behind her, toward something darker than death. And in that moment, Lyra knew Ashmark had not come alone. The moon dimmed, the blood turned cold. Something ancient had been watching, and now it had taken notice. She vanished into the trees after that. Lyra's breath had gone shallow, her skin fevered and raw. The forest swallowed her, and the woman who once held love in her heart died somewhere between scream and silence. What emerged was something else. She ran without stopping, not for water, not for rest. The pain of Kale's death curled inside her like a second spine, every step another crack in her mind. The blackwood forest welcomed her, as it always did the broken. They say it's cursed, older than fire, older than the moon. But Lyra knew better. It was alive. The trees twisted when she passed. They moved not in the wind, but in breath. Some bore carvings that bled when touched. Some hung with corpses, human, wolf, and things with both faces, that swayed though there was no breeze. She wandered until her nails grew long, her eyes turned yellow, and her dreams. Oh, the dreams. Kyle came to her, each night beneath that blood moon that refused to wane. But his words were wrong. He would whisper, "You left me," or "Dig deeper," or "You know what grows inside you now." She clawed at her ears, howled at nothing, but the whispers remained. The villagers at the forest's edge spoke of her in fear. They called her the Pale Wolf, the one with silver scars across her face and eyes that glowed like cursed embers. They left offerings on their thresholds, bloody feathers, wolf bones, still beating hearts of goats. It was not enough. One night, under the starlight strangled by clouds, Lyra found herself in a chapel. The priest was speaking to a crowd about cleansing fire, about the taint of the beast. His silver cross glowed unnaturally in his hand. Lyra listened, hidden, until he spoke Kale's name. She did not hear the rest, only the pounding of her heart. Her vision narrowed to red. She moved through shadows like smoke. By the time the priest noticed her, it was too late. She tore out his throat mid-sermon. The congregation screamed, scattered like birds, but Lyra wasn't done. She threw aside the altar and found what she had smelled all along. 3 wolf pups, caged, their necks bound in silver collars, their eyes wide with terror. Rage was no longer a flame. It was a flood. She didn't kill the villagers. Not then. She simply let the pups out and watched. Watched what they became in the panic. Watched what silver did to their souls. By morning, only the steeple remained, blackened and hollow. The rest was ash. Lyra walked into the woods, her skin steaming where the priest had touched her with the cross. The mark remained, a burn in the shape of a sun. She wore it like a scar, not of shame, but of memory. She no longer howled for Kale. She howled for the dead, and the forest answered. The deeper Lyra ventured into the blackwood, the less the sun rose. She stopped counting days. Light became a rumor. Time bled. The trees grew tighter together, their trunks coiled with vines that pulsed faintly like veins. Above, the canopy formed, a dome, an emerald cathedral for forgotten things. It was there, guided by the scent of old blood and moonstone dust, that Lyra found it, a door carved into the base of a dead mountain. Bone totems guarded its path, wolf skulls strung with sinew, each with mouths agape as if caught mid-scream. The wind did not blow here, it listened. Inside, she descended. Each step into the tomb felt like falling into her own grave. The air was thick with decay and old fur. Glyphs lined the stone walls, depictions of great wolf kings and queens, ancient and monstrous, kneeling before a burning tree. Kale's bloodline, the Moonfangs. They had sealed themselves here in death, and they did not want her to follow. A voice, her own, but not echoed in the chamber. You are not vengeance. You are its vessel. Suddenly the walls shivered. Spirits emerged, gray, eyeless, spectral wolves that circled her, howling not in warning but mourning. Among them stood Kale's shade, distorted and flickering. His jaw unhinged as he screamed, without sound, blood dripping from eyes that wept smoke. They begged her to turn back, but it was too late. At the center of the tomb was a stone altar. Upon it, an obsidian vial, pulsing softly, old blood. She drank. The change was not gentle. Lyra's limbs cracked and stretched. Her bones popped and shifted. Her skin tore and regrew, as something older than wolf took hold. Her ribs glowed through the skin, bones etched in silver runes. Her spine twisted, and a second heart began to beat beneath her sternum. Her eyes became like glass, reflective, inhuman. Her howl split the tomb walls. Some spirits vanished, others fled. Only Kale remained, but his face was no longer his. It shifted, twitched, stitched. A cruel smile formed. And then he spoke, not in Kale's voice, but Ashmark's. You wear his death like perfume. She awoke on the forest floor, unsure if it had been vision, dream, or memory, but she felt it. New senses. She could smell deceit, feel regret like a heat wave, hear the voices of the forgotten whispering beneath every tree. And yet, something was wrong. The men she had killed, hunters, silver smugglers, even that priest, they had returned, not alive, but reanimated husks. Their flesh blackened, their eyes missing, their lips sewn shut with strands of hair. Hers. They did not speak aloud, but they whispered her name inside her head. Lyra. 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 And worse, they whispered Kyle's name, as if he were with them, as if he had never left. Lyra followed the trail of rot. Ashmark, the butcher of Kale, had moved east, beyond the edge of any map, into the scorched ruins of St. Lyra's monastery. She found it burned to black bones. The bell tower stood like a finger pointing to a god long gone. The walls were painted in ash and scripture scratched over by claw and bone. Inside, monks sat in eternal prayer, mouths sewn shut, eyes gouged out. But their heads turned when she entered, as if sensing the weight she carried. She did not kill them. Something already had. Beneath the altar, she found a diary wrapped in cured skin. Its pages told truths no one should ever write. Ashmark had once loved a werewolf, not hunted, loved. She had turned feral during childbirth, torn apart by her own transformation. He blamed her, blamed the child. He killed them both. And from that day forward, he wore the skin of wolves, believing it would make him stronger than the beasts he loathed. But that wasn't the worst part. Tucked in the final pages, scrawled in feverish ink, Ira carries the old one's seed, her breath caught. She hadn't bled since Cale's death. Her belly had felt tight, warm, unnatural. In the silence of that monastery, her hands trembled over her womb. Inside, something shifted, moved, not like a child, like a thought with claws. That night, her dreams burned. Cale came to her again whole this time. But when she ran to him, he turned. His back had been hollowed out, his spine exposed. Strings ran through his limbs, and as he turned, she saw the truth. It was not Cale. It was a puppet stitched together with limbs that weren't his, bones that bent wrong. Ashmark stood behind it, fingers tangled in the strings, grinning with eyes that glowed like hot coals. You want him back? Then find me. She awoke vomiting blood, and the forest was different. The trees bent away from her now. Even the spirits watched in silence. The final message burned itself into her mind. Whispering Hollow, a cursed place. A place where wolves go mad, where the howls never stop and the roots drink memory. It was there. Ashmark waited. She entered just before dusk. The forest there was no longer alive. It was ossified, dead trees, sharp as spears. Every step echoed with groans and ghostlight. Her breath turned to mist that showed visions. Cale's death over and over, looping like punishment. Voices followed her. The unborn child inside her spoke, not aloud, but in pulses of thought, each one colder than the last. He's not your enemy. You are. She stumbled forward, her bones twitching beneath her skin, her shadow crawling against her feet like a second creature. At the hollow's center, she saw him. Ashmark, standing atop a stone dais surrounded by silver lanterns. His cloak flared in the dying wind. His face was still covered in Cale's flayed snout, but he looked tired, worn, and behind him, the puppet. It moved on its own now. Cale's false body stepped forward. Its mouth opened in a scream, but no sound came out. Only a fog that stank of iron and childbirth. Ira screamed back and lunged. Lyra hit the dais with fury that broke stone. Ashmark's puppet stumbled back, twitching like a marionette tangled in its own strings. She ripped through it, tearing the false Cale limb from limb, screaming with every shred, until all that remained was a twitching pile of stitched regret. Ashmark watched in silence. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't run. Instead, he whispered, "I wanted you to become this." Lyra froze. Her chest heaved, her skin steamed. "What?" she growled. Ashmark stepped down from the dais. The silver in his coat glinted in the moonlight. "I killed Cale," he said, voice flat. "But I didn't summon the old blood. You did. With your grief, with your rage. You fed it. You called it." He opened his arms. "I am no longer your enemy. You are the prophecy. You are what ends us." The child inside her kicked. Pain racked her spine. She fell to all fours, vomiting black blood. Her fingers elongated into claws that split through the nail beds. Her fur burst from her skin like roots through rotted wood. Her mouth widened into a maw of jagged, unnatural fangs. Her scream, inhuman, agonized, split the hollow open. Silver lanterns shattered. The trees cracked. Spirits fled. The moon itself blinked behind clouds, as if unable to bear witness. Ashmarks, guards, mercenaries, killers, fools, rushed in. She tore through them like parchment. One's throat was ripped out mid-prayer. Another tried to run and was pinned to a tree by her claws, where she peeled off his face and left it as a message. Ashmark stood unmoving, eyes wide, not with fear but relief. "Do it," he whispered. "End this." Lyra stalked toward him. Each step left Ash. Her eyes were twin eclipses. Her teeth dripped with memory. But she did not kill him. The child stopped her, its voice inside her mind. "Let him suffer, as we have." So instead, Lyra reached forward and pressed her claw to Ashmark's forehead. She whispered a curse older than fire. "I mark you," she said, "as prey." A rune seared itself into his flesh, smoke rising from his skull. You will walk the earth until the wolves you murdered rise to devour you. And I will not stop them. Ashmark fell, screaming, as the spirits returned. Those bound in fur and fire, ripping at his soul with spectral jaws. But they did not kill him, not yet. Lyra turned and walked away, dripping blood and shadow, her child pulsing with power beneath her ribs. Behind her, the whispering hollow ignited in blue flame. The sky cracked, the forest bowed, and the pale wolf was born. The forest grew still after the hollow burned. Where once the trees whispered, now they stood silent, as if in mourning or reverence or fear. Lyra walked through them, no longer woman, no longer wolf, but something between, something beyond. Her breath steamed in the cold air, even when there was no cold. Her blood no longer beat with rhythm, but with purpose. She reached a glade the sun had long forgotten. There, under the shadow of a black eclipse, she collapsed. The birthing began. It was not natural. It was not meant for this world. There was no blood, only shadow and light pouring from her, threading through the earth like roots from a dying star. Her body cracked open as the old blood called to the sky, to the spirits, to the gods that had turned their faces long ago. And then the child was born, not as a pup, not as a babe, but as a pale, four-eyed hybrid, its eyes glowing with dual moons, its skin laced with ancient runes that shimmered with frost. It did not cry, it growled softly, and the forest answered. The wind rose, the trees bent, and the soil pulsed. All who had once hunted her felt it. Ashmark, broken and cursed, screamed beneath a moonless sky as phantom wolves began to encircle his mind. The villagers near Blackwood locked their doors for good. There, children taught not prayers but warnings. Beware the pale wolf and her spawn. Lyra did not return to them. She vanished into the mist, her child swaddled in a cloak of Kale's memory, her body wrapped in legend. Some say she walks the forest's edge on nights when the moon is dark, whispering lullabies in a language only ghosts remember. Others claim they've seen her eyes in the trees, watching, waiting, hungering. But all agree on one thing. The pale wolf walks again, and she is not alone. If you enjoyed this story and want more chilling legends and terrifying tales, make sure to like this video. It really helps us out. You can also click on our Ultimate Werewolf playlist to watch more horror and cryptid stories. The link is in the description below. And if you love horror, folklore, and unexplained mysteries, subscribe to the channel and join our growing community of fear seekers. But don't stop there. Turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Because in the world of horror, the scariest things happen when you least expect them. And trust me, you don't want to be left in the dark. Welcome to the darkness.